G through Z. So as you all know, I am new here. Cindy Brangiaforti is here, subbing for Dana McPhee. She has letters throughout the alphabet, and she'll be here till November when Dana returns.
So here with us tonight, we have Shannon Vasconcelos. And she's here to give us just a seminar from the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. She'll be able to answer questions throughout the seminar. We do have some handouts. I think everyone has them here. If you missed anything, we do have some outside on the table out there. But she's going to go through the general seminar. I'm hoping she can answer all of your questions. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight to hopefully learn a little bit about paying for college, which I know is not anyone's favorite subject, but we're going to try and make it as painless as possible. I spent about 10 years working in college financial aid offices here in the Boston area at Boston University and Tufts University, and now I'm here with MHFA, hoping to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit about what happens in the financial aid process, what those financial aid officers are actually thinking when they send you these financial aid offers. So hoping to reduce your stress level at least a little bit. Trying to see what's my best angle going to be on this. Just so you know a little bit about MHFA, there's all sorts of ways to get in touch with us. After tonight, if you have questions, go to our website, call our 800 number, follow us. We're all over social media. You can email us. So I'm going to get you all the information I can in the next hour or so. But if questions pop up down the line, as they inevitably do, feel free to stay in touch with us. We are here to help throughout this process. MHFA is the state's nonprofit authority tasked with helping families in Massachusetts save, pay, and plan for college. In terms of saving, we do manage the state's couple of college savings plans, the U Fund and the U Plan. Maybe, hopefully, some of you might have some college savings accounts with us. In terms of planning for college, we like to come out and do these community events. We have an email list you can get on. If you fill out the evaluation survey at the end, if you give us your email address, it'll get you in our email loop, so we'll be letting you know kind of where you should be at. You'll get an email maybe every couple weeks. We don't spam you too much, but letting you know kind of what you should be doing at this point in time to make sure you're on track. And in terms of paying for college, we do offer an alternative education loan. So after all the financial aid packages come through, if you still need a little bit of help paying the bill, you might want to take a look at our loan. So these are the kind of basic topics we're going to go over today. We're first going to talk about what is financial aid, where do you get it, what you need to do on your end to apply for financial aid. Then we'll kind of flip the script a little bit and look at things from the college's perspective. What are the colleges doing once they actually receive your financial information? We'll talk a little bit at the end about kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. How do people actually manage to pay for college? And I will be pointing you in the direction of some free resources that you can use moving forward. So to start with kind of what financial aid is. Money to help students pay for college. That part is not rocket science. But a financial aid package will likely consist of 3 different items. Grants and scholarships, we call that gift aid, that's the free money, that's what you hope to see the most of on a financial aid award. And then you may see some federal work study, which is just the opportunity for the student to have a little part-time job on campus, earn a little bit of money that way. One thing I like to point out about work study is that it is not necessarily available to pay the tuition bill. You don't receive it up front. The student still has to get the job and work the hours, and they'll just get paid in a regular, weekly or bi-weekly paycheck. So it tends to be more for, buying books maybe, having money for, pizza and living expenses throughout the years, less so than actually paying the tuition bill. And then you are likely to see some student loans on your financial aid package as well. And this is kind of the full financial aid picture. There is tons of financial aid out there. At last count, 184 billion. Okay, this is still working. So for one message I certainly want to convey tonight is that I don't want anyone thinking they cannot go to college or their kids cannot go to college because they cannot afford it. There's lots of financial aid out there. It's just a matter of tapping into those resources, though you will see that kind of the biggest piece of the pie here is, in fact, federal student loans. You are very, very likely to see student loans as part of a financial aid package. We hope it's not the entire package, but most financial aid packages will contain at least some student loans. So where does this financial aid actually come from? And there are four kind of overarching sources. And the good news is to apply for financial aid from 3 out of the 4 sources. It's usually just 1, maybe 2 applications that you send into the school's financial aid office, and they figure out what you're eligible for in terms of federal government aid, state government aid, as well as aid directly from the college or university itself. The only type of assistance that you may have to apply for separately is what we tend to call outside scholarships or private scholarships, basically scholarships from anyone other than the government or the schools. You know, there's thousands of scholarships out there, and they all have their own application, they all have their own deadlines. So those are the only types of aid that you need to pursue kind of individually. There are a couple websites here where you can search for scholarships online. You also got a handout from your school counselors that includes some more scholarship resources. One thing that I always like to point out about these outside scholarships, especially the ones that you find online, they do tend to be very competitive nowadays. Now, with the internet, it's not like, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was applying to college when there was no internet, it was hard to track down scholarships. Once you found one, it was maybe not all that hard to win because not too many other people found it. Nowadays with the internet, it's the reverse situation that everything gets found. Any given scholarship becomes very difficult to win. So you may want to be sort of selective about the private scholarships that you choose to pursue. If something doesn't sound like a perfect match for your kid and you found it through one of these online databases, maybe skip the time and effort that would go into that application. It's better used on your child's schoolwork or another scholarship application that they're very well suited for and might stand a really good chance of winning. So just kind of keep that in mind with the national searches. You're going to have a lot of competition. You might want to be kind of selective about what you choose to pursue. You definitely want to pursue any kind of local community-based scholarships. Your school counseling office will be reaching out to the students in the spring about how to apply for any local scholarships. Those are always really good ones to put the time and energy into the application, just because you just naturally have much less competition when it's just restricted to your town or your high school. You stand a decent shot of winning any of those local scholarships. So those are ones that I'd recommend your kids put some time and energy into. But all these other sources of aid, government and the college themselves, it's kind of a one-stop shop in applying for them. And we mentioned that the student loans are going to make up probably part of most financial aid packages. So this is just a kind of very brief overview of the most common student loan program, the direct student loan program that you will likely see as part of a financial aid package. This is a loan from the government. It is in the student's name. There's no credit check, no cosigner required. It's very automatic. All you need to do is fill out the FAFSA form and you can get this loan. We're going to talk about the FAFSA in just a minute. Decent interest rate. We actually don't know what interest rates are going to be for next year yet. They reset the interest rates on new loans every July 1st. So these are for kids borrowing this current year, this 4.5%. It'll be a little bit different next year, but probably in that same ballpark. And there are caps on the amount that you can borrow on the side here, between $5,500 and $7,500 per year. So you may be able to totally or close to pay for community college with just these Stafford loans. They are not going to cover, the full cost of a 4-year school. There are other loans you can borrow that can help supplement. But these, again, are very automatic. If you borrow the full amount for all 4 years, that's $27,000. Depending on exactly what happens with interest rates, that probably equates to a monthly payment after graduation of like $300 a month, in that ballpark. So it's, it's going to be challenging likely for a kid to pay those kind of bills with their first job out of school, but likely doable. I get concerned when I see kids taking on a whole lot more debt than this. That's when kids can get into trouble with their student loans. And in fact, kids cannot borrow any more than this without somebody, and it's usually a parent co-signing for them. After this kind of automatic $27,000 amount split over the 4 years, it would be a credit-based loan, and an adult with an established credit history would at least have to co-sign. So that's something to keep in mind. So most of what I'm going to talk about today is need-based financial aid, but I did just want to quickly touch on merit aid briefly, because it's another great way to get a discount on the price of school. So we're talking about here like merit scholarship, academic scholarships. And we as students and parents tend to look at these kinds of scholarships as a reward. Congratulations on doing well in high school. I'd like to reward you with this $10,000 scholarship. I would encourage you to look at scholarships more from a college's perspective. From a college's perspective, a scholarship isn't really a reward, it's a recruitment tool. The colleges have this limited pot of merit scholarship money. They're going to offer it to the students they really want to enroll the most. And the wants of a school is going to depend on the individual school. Different schools can have some different institutional priorities, but typically it's going to go to the top students in their applicant pool. So you want to how that relates to you and how it can affect you and your child's process here is I would recommend applying to at least a couple more like safety schools for your child, where they are they're going to stand out, where their grades, their test scores are above average for those schools. You want to have certainly some schools like that on your list anyway, just to make sure you get in someplace. You don't want to apply to all real root schools where you're unlikely to get in, but also for scholarship purposes. The schools where you are more above average as a student, where you look really good, those are the schools most likely to offer you scholarships. You could be, a straight A student, but if you only apply to like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, where everyone's a straight A student, you don't stand out in that crowd and you're not going to be offered scholarship money. But you could be more like a solid B student, and if you apply to schools where the average is more like a C, you look very good in that crowd, you are likely to see some good scholarship offers. So that's the biggest thing to think about with the merit scholarships. Apply to some schools where you're kind of a little overqualified is really the best strategy. Definitely want to check a college's website to see what detail they provide about the scholarships that they offer. Sometimes they require a separate application, but actually usually they don't. Usually you just apply for admission, you're automatically considered for any scholarships the school has. But sometimes they do have, even if there's no application to fill out, you might have to apply for admission by a special earlier deadline. They might say something like, our regular decision deadline is January 1st, but if you'd like to be considered for our honors program or any scholarships, you need to apply by our priority deadline of December 1st or by our early action deadline. So just make sure any schools that your kids are thinking about, check their website, see what info it offers about scholarships and if there's any kind of special application procedures you need to go through. We're going to be talking today mostly about need-based financial aid, which is based on the family's finances. So usually at most schools, they have kind of two separate pots of money. One for their merit scholarships, where you don't have to be at all needy, according to the calculations, and then one for their need-based financial aid. And in fact, most financial aid is need-based. And your eligibility is determined by kind of a standardized formula that tries to put everyone on kind of an even playing field to the extent possible, which is not 100%, but that's the attempt to try to make the process as fair as possible. And actually, an important note about this satisfactory academic progress: make sure that you and your child know the academic requirements to keep any scholarship or financial aid that they are offered. Merit scholarships tend to have kind of higher academic standards to keep them, like you have to maintain a 3.0 or a 3.5 GPA once you're at the school if you want it renewed for each of your 4 years. The need-based aid requirements are generally a little bit lower, but there are still some minimum GPA credit load requirements. That was always the saddest situations that I would see when working in an aid office, a student that came in with a fabulously generous financial aid package, and then they maybe kind of goofed off a little bit freshman year, didn't make the grades, and then lost all that financial aid for their second year, and sometimes that meant having to drop out of school. So make sure that your child knows the academic requirements and keeps on studying when they're in college. Getting to the college is not the end goal. They got to keep studying throughout college. So what do you need to do on your end to actually apply for financial aid? We have a nice timeline in one of the handouts you got there. But the financial aid application process is happening, and this is all during senior year of high school, is happening beginning October 1st, so whatever that is, a week from now, I think. That's when the financial aid applications open up for the next school year. So you couldn't go home tonight and fill out your aid application, but a week from now you can. October 1st is the soonest you can fill out the financial aid applications, and then every college sets their own financial aid application deadlines. And they can kind of be all over the map starting as early as November. If your child's applying early action or early decision anywhere, they might have a November financial aid deadline going through like March, our kind of typical financial aid deadline. So it's basically happening sometime in the kind of fall, winter-ish timeline. And so just check the website. The websites of the schools are really your best resources for everything. They'll tell you on their website what their application deadline is. So the big form you have to fill out to apply for financial aid is, in fact, the FAFSA form. You have probably heard of it if you haven't filled it out before yourself. So this is a form, it's a government form, it's required by all colleges to apply for financial aid. It's not required if you're not applying for financial aid, but I'm assuming because you're here, you're probably planning on applying for financial aid. So you'd want to do the FAFSA, again, available October 1st. On this FAFSA.gov. Actually brand new last year, the FAFSA also has a mobile app. So you can actually do the FAFSA right on your phone. And it's called My Student Aid if you wanted to download it. So you can do it on your phone, on your computer. One thing you need to do to complete the FAFSA is you need to sign in with what they call an FSA ID, which is just fancy acronym for username and password that you're going to use to fill out the FAFSA and also to access any government student aid site. So if perhaps you have your own student loans, you may already have your own FSA ID. But to complete the FAFSA, the student needs an FSA ID and one parent needs an FSA ID. So in the end, you're kind of two parties need to sign off on the FAFSA that you're saying, this information is accurate to the best of my knowledge, the student and the parent. So you're going to need two FSA IDs in your household. That's something, if you're anxious to kind of do something now, and you can't actually fill out the application till October 1st, you can go to that FSA ID website and request your FSA ID now if you wanted to get one step out of the way. So the FAFSA has kind of this intimidating reputation. I will tell you they have made a number of improvements in the form over the past number of years. So it is not as bad as you might imagine. One of the biggest improvements they've made is the IRS data retrieval tool, which is a way for you to essentially just kind of click a button and it imports all of your income tax information right into the FAFSA. So you no longer have to kind of manually enter what's your adjusted gross income, what's your taxes paid. You're not looking to match up line items on your tax return. You can just press a button, it all comes in from the IRS. So that makes the FAFSA a whole lot easier to fill out, makes FAFSAs more accurate. You know, you're not adding an extra zero by mistake somewhere. You're getting the real info right from the IRS. So I definitely recommend using that tool. You're not required to. You can manually enter all the information, but using the data retrieval tool is a lot easier. Once you're logged into the FAFSA, you will kind of see that option. And you do have to do the FAFSA every year. It's not a one-time thing. If you want to kind of more detail on kind of line by line, step by step, how to fill out the FAFSA, we do have a webinar up on our website you can take a look at. So these are the kinds of things they're going to ask you for on the FAFSA. Basic kind of name, address, social security number, demographic info, what colleges the student is applying to. That's one of the first questions they ask. So you need to know at least one college that your student is applying to when you fill out the FAFSA. You can always log back into the FAFSA later and add more colleges. So if right now, hey, you know, like 3 schools your child's applying to that you're pretty darn sure, but you're likely add a couple more schools over the coming months, that's okay. You can submit it to those 3 schools now that you know for sure about and add more schools later. So it's going to ask about the household. And first of all, who the parents are in the household. Which you'd think, you know, shouldn't be a challenging question, but it often is because the FAFSA is very specific about who they consider parents. So if the students' biological or adoptive parents are married to each other, it's those 2 parents who go on the FAFSA. Also, if they're not married but living together, those 2 parents go on the FAFSA. But if parents are divorced, separated, never married, the FAFSA only wants the financial information of the custodial household. How they define custodial, they don't care what any actual custody agreement says. They say, who does the student spend the majority of time with? That is the household we're interested in. Even if it's, you know, joint custody, usually there's one parent who the student spends a little bit more time with, and that is the parent that goes on the FAFSA. If that parent is remarried, the step-parent's information also goes on the FAFSA. It is the financial information of that entire household. So in cases of divorce, non-custodial parent is invisible, the one that the student lives with less. Custodial parent, and if they're married, that step-parent goes on the FAFSA. And then it's going to ask for your financial information. Your income data is actually your income from 2 years prior to the year you're applying for aid for. So for you folks, assuming you're all parents of seniors, your kids are starting college in 2020, it's your 2018 income that the colleges are looking at. And again, that you can pull in right from the IRS database. It's also going to ask about assets like savings accounts you have, investment accounts, what you do not want to report at all. It will tell you to exclude this on the FAFSA, so make sure you're doing that. The value of your retirement accounts, do not put those on the FAFSA. And your equity, if you own your own home, your equity in your primary residence, you don't report that. If you happen to own like a vacation home or a rental property, that does have to be reported, but your primary residence is invisible, your retirement accounts are invisible. So that's the FAFSA form, and that is a form you are almost certainly wanting to fill out. That's a form that every college requires to apply for financial aid. Then there's this other financial aid application called the CSS profile. This is not required everywhere, nowhere close to that. This is required by a group of about 300 almost entirely private schools. The schools I work, BU and Tufts, both required the profile. And it is a longer form than the FAFSA. Essentially, these kind of 300 schools at one point many years ago got together and said, you know, wait a second, we've got our own money to award here. We don't think the FAFSA provides us with enough information to determine who's really the most needy or not. We want to ask some more questions. We want to dig a little bit deeper. So they got together with the college board, the people who do the SAT, created this form, the profile form. So again, check the school's websites to see if your kids are applying to any private schools. There's even a few public schools, like some of the big name ones like Michigan, Virginia, UNC, Chapel Hill, that require the profile. It's not any of the Massachusetts state schools. So if you're applying to just public colleges in Massachusetts, you do not have to fill out this form. So the biggest differences on the profile, it costs a little bit of money. FAFSA is free to fill out. This one you have to pay for each school you submit to. And the profile does assess your home equity. They also, most of the schools that request the profile also assess a non-custodial parent contribution. So I just talked about who's the custodial, non-custodial parent. The FAFSA only looks at the custodial parent. Profile schools generally look at both. So if your child is applying to any of the private schools that ask for the profile, be prepared that both households' information are going to be looked at. And then occasionally a school might have their own financial aid application. This very few and far between. Most schools just require the FAFSA, and a bunch require the FAFSA and the profile, but there are a few out there that still have their own financial aid application. So what happens after you apply? The colleges receive all that data that you put on the financial aid applications. You will receive on your end, or actually the student receives, so make sure your kids are checking their email, a link to what they call the student aid report. That is the result of the FAFSA. So you click on the link and it will show you basically a summary of everything you put on the FAFSA. So you do want to check that over, make sure you didn't make any mistakes. Again, like throw an extra 0 on some number that's going to really throw things off. If you do discover any mistakes, no big deal. You just log back into the FAFSA and correct them and resubmit. Very easy to do. The student aid report will alert you if there were any kind of issues, like you didn't match up against like a citizenship database, and they'll tell you to contact the school to resolve it. So you definitely want to look at your student aid report. This is also a good point to contact the financial aid offices with any special circumstances that you might have. So again, kind of despite the intimidating reputation, the FAFSA actually asks, relatively few questions about your family's financial circumstances. So if you feel like those kind of few data points that you've given don't tell the whole story for your family, you want to write the financial aid offices directly explaining what special circumstances you have. It is always at the aid office's discretion to kind of stray from the FAFSA formula a bit, to take your special circumstances into account. But the only way they know about it is if you write to them directly. They don't ask about special circumstances on the FAFSA, so you have to take the initiative, send an email into the aid office explaining your circumstances, asking them to take them into account. The most common one is a decrease in income. So remember, I said they're going to ask about your 2018 income. If you've lost your job since 2018, that 2018 income could bear, no resemblance to your current reality. That's a huge one that you would certainly want to alert the financial aid offices about, ask them to take into consideration. There can be other things like you have high medical expenses, or you're supporting an elderly relative or a special needs child that has these extra expenses. You're still paying back your own student loans as a parent. Maybe you received child support in 2018, but that child support is ending soon. Sometimes it ends when the kid turns 18 or graduates high school. So again, that 2018 income is not reflective of what your income is going to be moving forward. So those are all good special circumstances to alert the aid offices to. And they don't have to take them into consideration, but they can. So you definitely want to let them know. You want to at least ask the question. The colleges might request verification documentation. What verification is just a certain percentage of FAFSA applications are automatically selected for verification. That's what the government calls it, where you have to kind of document that the numbers you reported are accurate. It doesn't mean if a school asks you for documentation, doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's just you were kind of randomly selected. So if a school asks you for more documentation, make sure you provide it in a timely manner, whatever kind of deadline they give you. Make sure you do it, because if you are selected for verification and you don't provide the documentation, you can't get the financial aid, so make sure you do that. In fact, the schools where I worked, when I worked there, they may have changed their policy now, they did 100% verification. They asked everybody for like copies of tax returns and things like that. So just be prepared that a school might ask you for documentation. If they do, just send it their way. And then the colleges review your application and figure out what financial aid you're eligible for. Oh, and this is just the verification stuff. So what's the college doing? How do they determine financial aid eligibility? Well, the number they always start with in their calculations is their cost of attendance. This is how much the school costs, including things that you're billed for, like tuition fees, room and board if you're living on campus, but also some what we call indirect expenses, what they estimate you would need for books and supplies and transportation and other kinds of miscellaneous expenses. So it's meant to be kind of an all-in estimate of what it would cost an individual student to live and attend this university for a year. So this cost of attendance is what every college starts with in their financial aid process. Then the next number they need to figure out is your expected family contribution, or they call it EFC. There's lots of fun acronyms in the financial aid world. So this is a number that is meant to represent how much they think your family can absorb in terms of 1 year's college costs. I will warn you, your EFC, what the colleges think you can pay is almost always more than what you think you can pay, but that's just something to kind of be prepared for. It's meant to kind of represent the fact that the theory is that the families have primary responsibility to pay for college to the extent that they're able, and financial aid is available to kind of make up the difference of what the family is not able to pay. So they first need to calculate what they think you should be able to pay. If you are curious what your EFC might be, we do have an EFC calculator on our website, so you can check that out. The other great tool to use is a college's net price calculator. These are tools that were mandated a few years back. The government said every college has to have a net price calculator on their website. And it's basically like an EFC calculator, but kind of specific to that school. You plug in your basic financial information, and it spits out for you what you would actually be expected to pay for that school and what financial aid you would qualify for. The government mandated these basically in response to the concern that, as college costs were increasing, people, particularly low-income families, were getting the impression, well, we can't afford college, you can't go to college, because they would see, on college websites, the college is costing $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70,000 a year, and they would say, oh, well, there's no way we can come up with that. I guess we can't afford for you to go to college, when in fact those low-income families would likely be eligible for lots and lots of financial aid, but it used to be the case that you wouldn't know what financial aid you were eligible for till you went through the process of applying to the college, applying for financial aid, and lots of students would kind of drop out somewhere in the process before they ever saw what financial aid they would be eligible for. So these net price calculators were meant to correct that and give families an upfront idea of what financial aid they would qualify for, what these schools would actually cost them, which may be nowhere close to sticker price. The numbers are really kind of crazy. It's like close to, at public colleges, almost 3/4 of students receive some type of scholarship or grant discount. 3/4 of students are not paying full price for public colleges. At private colleges, it's ridiculous. It's like 90% of students are getting a scholarship or grant discount. Almost no one is paying those full outrageous sticker prices. So these net price calculators will give you the best idea of what a college would actually cost you. They're not perfect. If you go on kind of a bunch of college websites, you'll see varying levels of quality in these calculators. You can kind of assume if a calculator only asks you a few questions, then the results may not be super accurate. If it's a more extensive calculator that asks you a lot of questions, more of a pain in the neck to fill out, you can probably trust the results a lot more. The best net price calculators also estimate merit scholarship eligibility. So if you see a calculator asking for numbers like GPA or SAT scores, things like that, it's also incorporating merit scholarships. So those calculators are fantastic and really give you a very good kind of all-in view of what kind of aid you're going to get at the school, what it's going to actually cost you. So if you haven't done the net price calculators yet for the schools your kids are thinking about, go home, do them tonight, or do them soon. I would not apply to any college without first doing the net price calculator to see what they're going to cost me. All right, so then once the schools have kind of all the information at hand, this is what they do. And pretty straightforward, again, at this highest level. They take how much they cost, They subtract out what they think you should be able to pay, and then the difference is your financial aid eligibility. And that's the most need-based financial aid that they could award you. Oops. And just kind of a quick look at the two big elements, the two financial figures feeding into your expected family contribution, your income and your assets. So a lot of people kind of get worked up about their savings, their assets, and say, hey, where can I put this money so it won't hurt me for financial aid? And the truth is, assets have very little effect on the financial aid calculations. So you can see here an example of 3 families who all have the same income, but very different amounts of savings, ranging from nothing saved at all to 150 grand sitting in the bank. And you can see their EFCs and how having, big jumps in amounts of savings actually have a pretty small effect on the EFC. This having 150,000 in the bank, the college is not expecting this family to contribute the whole 150,000 to college. It only increases their EFC by like $7,000. It's a very small percentage. It tends to be like in the ballpark of like 5% of your assets they expect you to contribute to college each year. What really drives the financial aid calculations is your income. So now we're looking at 3 families that all have the same amount of savings, but now different incomes. And we're actually looking at smaller jumps in income here. And you can see for each little jump in income, the EFC goes up quite a bit, jumping from 75 to 150,000. Bump the EFC up by like $24,000. They are expecting families to contribute a big chunk of their income to college. And for most folks, your income just kind of is what it is. There's usually not a whole lot you can do about it. You certainly want to avoid inflating your income in any way in a year that the colleges are looking at. Like if you happen to have like stocks that you were going to sell to pay for college, you probably don't want to sell them in a year that the college is looking at your income for. So for you all, if your parents are seniors, remember they're looking at 2018 for this first year. So that's past. There's nothing you can do about your 2018 income. But then over the 4 years of college, they're going to look at 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. It's basically the 4 years that range from halfway through sophomore year of high school to halfway through sophomore year of college. Those are the 4 years of income that will eventually be looked at in an aid application. So that's just something to take note of. So essentially how the formula works is meant to, again, determine what each family is able to pay and really make cost differences in schools above what the family is able to pay really kind of inconsequential is the theory in an ideal world. I'll talk about why our actual world is not ideal, but this is basically how it's supposed to work. This family's example, the family is calculated to be able to contribute like $5,000 a year. They apply to 4 different colleges, very different price points. College D is like a community college-ish cost, so that's like Mass Bay here. College C would be your in-state public, maybe that's UMass Amherst. College B is more of the cost of like an out-of-state public, so like UNH maybe. And then College A is one of those pricey private schools like the ones I worked at that are up around $70,000 a year now. But you can see this family has the same $5,000 contribution no matter how expensive the school is, and they just have much greater financial aid eligibility the more expensive the school gets. So for that reason, I wouldn't necessarily recommend excluding those kind of pricier private schools from your college selection process because you just naturally tend to qualify for more financial aid there. And the private schools do also tend to be kind of have more money to give. So I think it tends to be good to apply to kind of a nice range of schools, a range in terms of public and private, cover your bases there, a range in terms of selectivity. So sure, have a couple reach schools, but also make sure you have a couple more like safety schools. So to just go through kind of an example of how a financial aid office awards financial aid, we've got a sample here of a school that costs $45,000. This is supposed to look like a barrel representing the full cost of the school. We got to come up with $45,000 to fill this barrel. And so the first thing that always goes in the barrel first is this family's contribution. Whatever, again, we think families have the primary responsibility to pay, so whatever they can pay kind of goes in first. So this family, again, we're assuming they can afford $5,000, or the school thinks they can afford $5,000. So then we're okay. So we've got a need level of $40,000. So the school now goes about trying to meet the student's need. And so they award them, maybe this student kind of stood out in the school's applicant pool. They awarded them a $9,500 scholarship. And then they also awarded them a need-based grant for $17,500. So we got a nice chunk of money there. So that's a good thing. $5,500 student loan. Again, that's that government guaranteed loan that you're going to see in most financial aid packages. A little bit of work study money. And then, now the school's run out of money. They don't have any more to give. And we are still $5,500 short. So even though the college calculated this family, they thought they could come up with $5,000, if this student actually wants to attend this school, they've got to come up with $10,500. Their EFC plus filling this gap of this unmet need that the school did not award them. So this is a phenomenon called gapping. When a school does not meet your full financial aid, it is very common in the financial aid world, so it's something to be prepared for. There are very few colleges in the grand scheme of things that guarantee that they will meet every student's full need. There's a short list. I just actually wrote a blog post about it, so I know the exact number. There's 77 colleges in the country. There's about 4,000 colleges in the country. 77 of them guarantee that they will meet the full need of every student that they accept. If you happen to want to see that list, if you go to, there's a blog called blog.getintocollege.com. And there's search on that blog for most generous schools, it will get you to that post. It has a full list of 77 schools. But they tend to be very, very rich, very hard to get into private schools. Most schools are not on that list. They don't guarantee that they meet every student's need. So what most schools do, and this happened, Tufts has met full need for a long, long time. BU, the other place where I worked, when I worked, they did not meet full need. They actually just announced, like a few weeks ago, moving forward, they do guarantee now that they will meet your full financial need. But when I worked there, they didn't. So what we had to do at BU was say, okay, we had this limited pot of money. It wasn't enough to meet everyone's full need. Whose need are we going to meet? Whose need are we not going to meet? And so what we would generally do is meet the full need of the students that we wanted to enroll the most. So that would be, again, like the top students academically. The students who were athletes, who we wanted to make sure they came. The students who were the children of legacies, that we wanted to keep them happy. We might meet their full need. The students that were applying to unpopular majors that we were having trouble in filling, we would meet their full need. The students we wanted for to increase the diversity on our campus. So that would mean ethnic, racial, minority students that we didn't have enough of, that were underrepresented on our campus. We would meet their full need. Even diversity in terms of geography. We wanted to make sure we could brag about having students from all 50 states on our campus. So if you were one of the few students from Montana or North Dakota who applied to Boston University, you were likely getting in, you were likely getting some good money from us because we wanted to make sure that we got you. So just be aware that a calculus like this goes on at many, many schools. Students who are maybe just barely able to get in, who don't meet any particular institutional goals, you might not get as much of your need met. So be aware of that. When you see a financial aid award, you might see it and say, there must be some mistake here. We certainly got lots of calls at Boston University when I was in the aid office. I was answering those calls of families calling us, they must have made a mistake on our financial aid award because there's no way we could afford the school. And I would have to say, essentially, I know you can't afford it, but we don't have any more money to offer you. So just be prepared for that. Again, good reason to apply to kind of a nice range of schools, both in terms of price, some low-cost schools along with some high-cost schools, and also in terms of selectivity, some schools where you might look particularly good, where you're above average. That will help you in getting more of your need met in many cases. So these are just to kind of prepare you for when you see financial aid offers, what they might look like. So here you can see, this is just describing the phenomenon I just talked about. We got 3 schools here again. To keep things simple, we're assuming they all cost the same, this $45,000. Again, same EFC everywhere. So this student has eligibility of $40,000 from each school. But if you look at the total aid, only College A totally met their full eligibility. College B offered a little less, and College C even less. So again, there can be lots of reasons for that. It could be the school just doesn't have a lot of money and basically gaps students across the board. It could be the student doesn't really stand out in the applicant pool at College C. They don't care as much about enrolling them. Could be this student applied 1 day late for financial aid at College C. Meeting deadlines are very, very important. Make sure you're keeping track of those. Don't miss a deadline. At some schools, it doesn't really matter. They're more flexible. They'll keep awarding you aid. Some schools, you miss a deadline, costs you thousands of dollars. So that could have been what happened at College C here. So just make sure you're meeting those deadlines. Some of this process is kind of out of your control, but there is some things that you can control. Meeting deadlines is one of them, so make sure that you can do that. This is just an example of another 3 potential award letters. Same scenario. Total eligibility of $40,000. And looking across the board at the bottom, you can see each school offered this family $35,000. So didn't meet their full need, but got pretty close. But are each of these financial aid offers equally generous? Could anybody want to shout out what kind of a big difference is in these offers? Yeah. The parent loans, yeah. This is something to just keep an eye out for. Some colleges will include parent loans as part of a financial aid package. I hate this process. I hate it when schools do this. They will say it is to let you know, kind of let the student know all the resources that are available to them. I think it's kind of a smarmy way that schools disguise the fact that they offered you no grants or scholarships at all. They offered you essentially nothing from the school, but they're going to disguise it by throwing a great big parent loan in the package. Parent loans, I would not consider them financial aid. They're more like a financing option. They're available to you at any school as long as you have the credit where you can pass a credit check. You can borrow the parent loan at any one of these schools. So don't be kind of led astray if a school awards one as part of a financial aid package. They're not being particularly generous with you. So just kind of be aware of that. Just very quickly about kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. I always like to remind families that there's kind of 3 ways you can pay for college. Out of your past income, that's your savings, all that past income that you saved up, you have in savings. Out of your current income, most colleges offer a monthly payment plan where you can pay some of the college bill on a monthly basis. If you don't have a ton in savings, that you can easily pay like a huge bill for a whole semester at once, but you could budget your monthly paycheck and pay some of the college bill that way, like we pay kind of all our other bills. That can be a really great option. I think it's kind of an underutilized option. It's not the default option. So you need to find the information on the school's website about the payment plan, sign up for it. But it can be a really great option. Certainly a lot better than borrowing. If you borrow a loan, it's going to cost you interest over 10 years, usually maybe more depending on the exact loan, whereas the payment plans are interest-free. So I would always kind of figure out what you can pay out of your savings and on a monthly payment plan before you look to borrowing. And I run into families that a lot of families fall into one of 2 categories. If you see a $20,000 bill, some families will kind of just think about their savings and say, well, I don't have $20,000 in the bank, so we can't afford this school, you can't go there, and not think about the other sources. Some families will see a $20,000 bill and immediately jump to the loans and say, okay, I'm going to owe $20,000, how do I borrow a $20,000 loan? So this is just kind of a reminder to make sure you're considering all of your sources of funding. Hopefully you have maybe a little bit in savings you can put towards the college bill. Look at your budget, figure out what you can pay on a monthly basis, and then only if there's leftover, borrow, but only what you need. Just a few very quick things just to think about. Community college can be a great option to save some money. So that's something to think about doing the first year at first 2 years, 1 or 2 years at the community college, then transferring into the 4-year school can save a lot of money. One thing you just want to be cognizant of if you're going to pursue that path, or if your child is, make sure that they're working with an academic counselor at the community college who knows that the 4-year school is the eventual game plan, and they will make sure they are taking the right courses that will transfer into the 4-year school. That's the only kind of mistake I sometimes see students falling into in trying to save some money by going to community college first. Sometimes they don't take the right courses, they don't transfer into the 4-year school, it ends up costing them more money than they originally thought. But if you're working with an academic counselor right from the beginning, you can avoid that problem. Think about kind of your total college cost. Too often you just get kind of laser focused on, okay, this first year's tuition bill. How do I manage to pay that? Okay, I think I can stretch and I can swing this first year. But remember, you got 4 years that you've got to pay for, and if you've got more than one child, you got 4 times 2 or 3 kids, So make sure you're thinking about all of that when you're making that enrollment decision for the first year for the first child. Don't kind of attend a school that's really too expensive for you, kind of blow all your money on your first year, and then what do you do the next 3 years for that kid, and what do you do for your next kid? You want to make sure you're planning kind of well in advance for all of this. You can calculate monthly loan payments. There's tons of student loan calculators online. We've got one on the MIFA website. So you shouldn't be going into this blindly. Sure, I'll sign for that $20,000 loan. Make sure you calculate what that's going to mean for you in terms of monthly payments after graduation, and make sure you're comfortable with that number. Think about what your child wants to do after graduation. Does this investment in this school, does it make sense based on their future career path? Which for a lot of students, they have no idea what they want to do, so this part is kind of hard to figure out. But I remember talking to one family recently who really, really wanted to go to BU, didn't qualify for any financial aid, but basically kind of spent every dime that they took home, didn't have any available income to pay for college. They were wanting to borrow the whole like $70,000, $80,000 a year, wanted to borrow $250,000 for the student's college education because it was their daughter's dream school. They really wanted to send her there, but she wanted to be a kindergarten teacher when she grew up. Does that investment, do you need to pay for $250,000 school to be a kindergarten teacher where you're not going to make a ton of money? Does that investment make sense? So that's something to think about. Is the student considering graduate school? In which case, again, there's going to be more money to pay down the line. You might want to shop for a better deal for undergrad. If you do think you might have to borrow it all beyond those guaranteed student loans for the $27,000, make sure your credit is okay. Check your credit report, check your credit score, make sure you're going to get approved for a loan. You don't want that to come up later. Once you've already, put a deposit down at a school, your child's planning on going in the fall and you're trying to pay the bill over the summer and you realize you have some issue in your credit that's going to prevent you from getting a loan and you can't pay without that loan. So check your credit reports now. And definitely, again, don't assume you can't afford a school based on the sticker price. Make sure you're looking at the net price and comparing all your offers. Just a couple programs to point you in the direction of. This mass transfer program is meant to ease that transition from community college into the 4-year school. Guarantees credit transfer, avoiding the issue I was talking about. So take a look at the mass transfer website. Tuition break, this is not going to be applicable to a ton of people, but just so you know it exists. This is all the New England public colleges have gotten together and said, if your child is majoring in kind of a weird program that is not available at your home state's public institutions, but is at another state's public institution, you can get a tuition break to attend that out-of-state private school. You don't have to pay the full out-of-state tuition. An example of this would be, I think, forestry. If your child wanted to major in forestry, the Massachusetts state colleges and the UMass system does not offer forestry as a major, but UMaine does, UVM does, UNH does. So your child could go to those schools at a reduced tuition rate. But it only applies for weird majors that aren't offered at the Massachusetts state schools. But if that happens to apply to your child, check out that website. Just some more resources for you. Your financial aid offices are good resources. The folks are there to help you, so don't hesitate to contact them. especially, again, asking them to consider special circumstances or any kind of questions you have at all about the application process or about the award. Once you get it, feel free to email, call them. They are there to help you. FAFSA Day, Massachusetts, the most wonderful day of the year. So this is a day, it used to be just one day, now it's actually a number of days across the state where they open up like computer labs in high schools and some colleges kind of around the state for either an afternoon on the weekend or an evening, and families can come for free and come fill out their FAFSA at the school, and there'll be folks kind of like me, lots of financial aid officers, kind of FAFSA experts walking around helping folks complete their FAFSA. So feel free to take advantage of this if you want to. You don't have to. You can go home on your own computer or again on your phone, complete the FAFSA all on your own. But if you thought you might want a little bit of extra help, go to one of these FAFSA days. And if you go to their website, it lets you know all the dates, all the locations, so you can sign up for one. Also, Mass Edco Centers also offer some free financial aid help, so you can check them out as well. Just so you know, another kind of seminar series that MIFA does, and we do it in the springtime, in March and April, after you should have received all of your financial aid offers. We come out again and do more seminars like this. We don't do as many of them. They're not as many schools, so there may not be one here, but there will be one at least at a nearby school that you can attend. You can attend ones at any school in the state. And we talk, this kind of was sort of the introduction, how to apply for financial aid, but at these seminars we talk about actually comparing financial aid awards, options for paying the bill, going back to the school and appealing for more money or potentially negotiating for more money. That's a phenomenon. I already talked about how you can go back and let schools know about special financial circumstances. Even if you don't have special circumstances, if you received like a nice scholarship offer from one school, but you'd really prefer to attend another school, you can go back to them and say, hey, you know, School X, thank you for this nice $5,000 scholarship. I really appreciate that. I'd really love to attend your school, but this other school offered me $10,000, and that's kind of hard to turn down. Is there anything else you can do? And you might be surprised at how often schools say yes to that question, and it will actually throw a few more $1,000s your way. If they think it will be enough to entice you away from another school. So that's always something to attempt to negotiate. It won't always be successful, but the worst a school will do is say, no, sorry, there's no more money we can give you, in which case at least you tried, and then you'll have to make some decisions from there. But again, you might be surprised at how often schools say yes. So I would try and negotiate. Any place I was considering, I'd ask them for more money. There's no downside. As long as you're halfway polite in your request. Yeah, so that is after the acceptance. So just if you get on our mailing list, we'll let you know when we start doing these. What you can do now, before you leave, you would have picked up an evaluation form when you walked in. Please do fill that out before you go, and you can leave it on the same table where you picked it up, if you can leave it there. And if you put your email address on there, which you're not required to, you can give us some anonymous feedback, but if you give us your email, that'll put you on our email list so we can keep in touch with you. Again, you can't fill out the FAFSA quite yet, but you can get your FSA ID, so that's something to do. Go to the college websites, find out what their deadlines are, what applications they need. And you can check out our website as well for a ton of great info. Whoops. And again, follow us on all of these social media pages to keep in touch with us as well. And that is about it. Actually, the evaluation form asks you for my name. It's kind of hard to spell, so there it is. And if more questions pop up along the way, just call us, shoot us an email, and we can try our best to help you. You can also leave us a Google review. That's brand new. But before I go today, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point. Does anybody have any questions they wanted to throw out? Yeah.
So with the estimated family contribution, and then even the award letter, since this example, they can pay $5,000, and then you get that letter where they give you that in grants, and then the rest of it is like kind of plus loans?
Yeah.
But that's not really, like, so are they saying you can afford $5,000 out of your pocket, you know, that year, plus a loan payment?
That's sort of what they seem to be saying when they send you an offer like that. But in fact, when they do that, whatever they didn't give you, they're awarding it in a loan. They're doing no calculation about, we think this family can afford it or not. So you need to do that kind of calculation on your end. And again, there's student loan repayment calculators online that you can use. So yeah, just because the school awarded it to you, they're not doing you any favors. That doesn't mean you can afford that loan payment. So that's what you kind of have to figure out on your own. They just awarded it to you because they wanted to make it look like they were being more generous, essentially, than they were. They didn't have the money to fully meet your need, or they had the money, but they wanted to give it to somebody else for whatever reason. They're just not meeting your need, so they're going to make that look less harsh by awarding you a loan, but it doesn't mean you can afford that loan payment. So that's what you have to figure out on your end. And that's actually a thing with that. So I mentioned that the direct Stafford loans from the government, that again, it's like $5,500 to $7,500 a year. That's kind of automatic for all students. Beyond that, it's going to be a credit-based loan, either a private like bank loan that the student's listed as the primary borrower for, or a parent has to, with a parent cosigner, because they need somebody with a good credit history to cosign on the loan. Or that Parent Plus loan is another government loan that is totally in the parent's name. So the student's not on that loan at all. The parent is totally responsible for that one. And it tends to have a relatively easy credit check to pass. It's not so easy that if you have real serious issues that you'll pass it, but it does not look at your credit score at all. It doesn't look to a debt to income ratio like most banks would do. It is just looking for any kind of big negatives in your credit history in the past 5 years. If you don't have any of those, you can be approved for a plus loan up to the total cost of the school. So if a school costs like $70,000 a year, and you have decent credit history, you can be approved for a $70,000 a year plus loan, even if maybe you're unemployed and you have zero income, or you make $20,000 a year. They're going to approve you for like $250,000 in loan, which there's no way you can pay that back if you have a low or no income. But they don't care. They don't look at your income at all. So that's where you really do have to kind of police yourself and figure out what can I actually afford to pay back, because the government's not going to cut you off. The school's not going to cut you off. You have to kind of cut yourself off. Yes?
So I have a question regarding merit scholarships. So if you really like to start at school, and you know you're probably not going to get any financial aid,
Mm-hmm.
it's still, so I went to one school and they said you have to fill out the FAFSA even to qualify for the merit scholarships that are offered to this particular school.
Yeah, so the question was, if you don't think you're going to qualify for financial aid, she visited one school that said you have to fill out the FAFSA even to be considered for merit scholarships. And I would say that's a somewhat rare policy, but some schools do have that policy where they make you fill out the FAFSA just to be considered for merit scholarships. And, the reason they do it, I think there can be a couple different reasons. One that they might point to is when you do the FAFSA, it automatically verifies your citizenship, and some schools restrict their merit scholarships to just U.S. citizens, so that's their way of confirming you're a citizen. They make you do the FAFSA. What I think is probably more often the case that they probably don't talk about is that's their way of kind of forcing people to nominate themselves that they're in the market for some money. Whereas if somebody's not going to fill out the FAFSA at all, they're just assuming, oh, that family wants to pay full price. We're not going to waste our merit scholarship money on them because they have not demonstrated to us that they're kind of a price-conscious consumer. So that's their way of kind of weeding out people with unlimited funds who aren't going to bother filling out the FAFSA. That's your way of kind of indicating you're in the market for some money. So that is a policy that some schools have. It's not the majority of schools, but some schools do want you to fill out the FAFSA even to be considered for merit scholarships. Most schools don't. But if you were thinking about not completing the FAFSA because maybe you've gone to the net price calculators of on each of the schools your child's applying to. You've gone to their calculator, you did the calculator, it showed you weren't going to get any financial aid, so you might say to yourself, okay, well, I'm not going to bother filling out the FAFSA then, there's no point to it. Before making that decision, I would check the school's website, or if you don't see it there, give the admissions or financial aid office a quick call and say, is it required for merit scholarships? Because that may be a reason you want to fill out the FAFSA, even if you don't think you're going to apply for financial aid. If they tell you it's not required for merit scholarships, then you know you're safe, not filling it out. If you don't need financial aid. The other reason you'd want to fill out the FAFSA, even if you don't expect to qualify for aid, is if you do want to take advantage of any of the government student loans, you do have to fill out the FAFSA for that reason. Yes?
I guess that's my point. The FAFSA triggers everything. That's my point. The FAFSA loans, everything's triggered off that. Am I correct?
It is triggered that they will let you know that you're eligible for Stafford loans. You don't have to take them. Yeah. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Do you fill that out before you do the actual college app, or you have to do the college app first? Like, will
Yeah.
that information get sent to the college, and the college say, well, you don't have
Yeah.
application yet, will they take that information and tell them?
Yeah, yeah. So the question, if anyone didn't hear, is there significance to the order? Because you have to say on the FAFSA what colleges you want the information sent to. Does that mean you have to have completed your admissions application for that school yet? And the answer to that is no. It doesn't matter in which order the applications come in. You can apply for admission first, then apply for financial aid, or you can apply for financial aid first. If they get that FAFSA and they don't have an admissions application yet, it just kind of sits there in their system until they get an admissions application, they match up the Social Security numbers, and they take things from there. But it doesn't matter which order you do them in. There's also, just so you know, there's not kind of the pressure to fill out the FAFSA like super fast, like be on there October 1st, getting your FAFSA in, because you've heard, the earlier the better. They won't review your FAFSA until they receive your admissions application. And in fact, until they've accepted the student. Now, you don't know yet you've been accepted, but the college does their review of the admissions applications, determines, okay, yep, we're going to accept this student. They give the financial aid office the okay, the financial aid office reviews the FAFSA. So kind of behind the scenes, that's what's happening. So, again, there's not the pressure to apply, on October 1st, get that financial aid application in if you're not going to apply to the school till, January, because they won't do anything with your FAFSA until they receive the admissions application. But once they receive both, that's when they review things. And again, it doesn't matter which order they came in. Yes? Yeah, so the question was, is there any benefit to applying early action financially? And there can be. There are some schools that do restrict certain scholarships. They might, and they will be upfront about that on their website. They will tell you, if you want to be considered for scholarships, you must apply by our early action deadline. Some schools will say that. So they'll be upfront if there is a significant financial advantage to it. They will be upfront about that on their website. Otherwise, not really. I do tend to say, kind of the earlier the better, because there are some schools that do kind of start to run low on money as the weeks and months tick by. Doesn't happen everywhere. At some schools, as long as you apply by the deadline, and that could be in March, you're looked at just like everybody else. I will tell you, when I worked at BU, and this again was many years ago, and they've changed things since then, but so our financial aid application deadline at the time, I think, was like February 15th. And at that point, you actually couldn't fill out the FAFSA at all until January 1st. They moved up the deadline. So the FAFSA opened up January 1st. We would start awarding students. It gets, second week in January, third week in January. We're going kind of at our normal pace. Towards the end of January, we start looking at our numbers and seeing, like, uh-oh, we're starting to run low on money. And we would start getting less generous with our awards, even before our deadline popped up. So even if you made the deadline, but you were one of like the last people to get their application in before the deadline, you might get a less generous award from us. So I do recommend trying to get things in early if you can, and that doesn't necessarily always mean applying early action. That can be a good option, but kind of earlier on in the regular decision process, I think you'll probably be just as fine at most schools, again, unless a school specifically tells you that certain scholarships are restricted to the early action pool. And if that's the case, they do tend to be open about that on their website. Yes?
You mentioned they don't look at your FAFSA until after they accepted you.
Mhm.
That's sort of the rule of that, or anything that's like lead blind in terms of decisions?
Yeah, so the question was, I mentioned that they're not going to look at the FAFSA until they've accepted you. Does that have anything to do with being need blind? No, at least not for the most part. The reason they don't look at the FAFSA until after they've accepted you is because they might have, 30,000 students apply and only 5,000 get in. It's just kind of a waste of their time and energy and money to review FAFSAs for 25,000 people who aren't going to get in. So they wait to see who's going to get in, and those are the FAFSAs they review. So that's the reason they're not reviewing anything until you've been accepted. And I just want to, again, make the point that you don't know yet you've been accepted. So what I don't want folks to do is wait till they've been accepted and then fill out the FAFSA. Wait till you've received notification of your acceptance and then fill out the FAFSA, because at that point you've likely missed their financial aid application deadline. So you make sure you get things in by whatever the deadline is. And again, what happens on the back end kind of doesn't really matter to you. But the need blind thing, just to clarify what that is schools can be what they call either need blind or need aware in their admissions process. If a school is need blind, that means they are guaranteeing you that the fact that you may or may not need financial aid will have no bearing on their admissions decision. That doesn't come into play. They don't look at that. They don't care if you're applying for financial aid or not. If a school is need blind, they will generally brag about that on their website. So it's usually pretty easy to identify need blind schools. They will say that on their website. And you will know the fact that you're applying for financial aid won't hurt you at all in the admissions process. If a school is need aware, that means they reserve the right to consider the fact that you may or may not need financial aid when making their admissions decision. I will tell you that, for folks who have heard about this, it's less of an issue, I think, than people tend to think it is. Most students at most schools are being, even at need-aware school, are being accepted or denied without any thought of their financial aid application, just based on their own academic record. Where it tends to come into play is at need-aware schools is for like the last, relative handful of students that they're accepting. They've admitted all the clear admits, they've denied all the clear denies, and now they've got some students right in the middle. They take a look at their numbers. These students could go kind of either way. They look at their numbers and say, we're running a bit low on funding. We could use a few more full pay students. That's where it might help you in the admissions process if you are not applying for financial aid, if you were a full pay student. So again, it can come into play at need-aware schools. Usually doesn't. It can. What that means to you, I think, is probably not much. I mean, if you need financial aid, apply for it. There's no use getting into a school if you can't afford to actually pay for it. Where I think it makes, where you have to think about it is if you're like very borderline for qualifying for financial aid, and do you really care? That are you willing to give up the financial aid to give your child maybe a slight boost in the admissions process? And again, maybe not. Likely it won't come into play at all. So would you give up the financial aid application for that? Again, if you need financial aid, apply for it. But if you don't think you're going to qualify, that's when there might be a decision there. But I think for most people, you just have to apply for financial aid. If the school's need blind, need aware, you can't worry about that. Yes? Yeah, the question was, how do 529 plans affect a financial aid application? For anyone who doesn't know, 529s are college savings plan. It's kind of like what 401k is to retirement plans, 529 is to college savings. It's a tax-advantaged college savings account. And again, I mentioned MIFA manages a couple of, or the state's 529, MIFA contracts with Fidelity to manage it on our behalf. But they enter the financial aid equation as a parental asset. And that's important. It will tell you that on the FAFSA. Make sure to read the instructions, because 529s can confuse people a little bit because both the student and the parent are listed on the account somewhere. For financial aid purposes, it is a parental asset. So when it asks you on the FAFSA to report the value of your investments, of the parent's investments, that's where you're reporting the amount of your 529. If you have 529s for multiple kids, you have to report them all there. They're all your investment as a parent. And it has, as I kind of showed in one of the examples up there, the assets have a pretty small effect on the financial aid calculation. So it's not going to kill you in the financial aid calculations. You do have to report it as part of your investments. It does feed into the calculations, but they're expecting you to only contribute a small percentage of parent assets to college, even though theoretically you're contributing the whole 529 to college. That's what it's there for. That's not how it feeds into the calculations. It gets a pretty gentle treatment. Makes no difference. Yes. Yes. Yes, you are. The question was, do you need to include your 529s for other children? Yeah, so it's the total parent investments, including the 529 you have for Johnny and for Susie. You have to add them all up, and they're all reported as your asset. And that's actually better than the alternative as reporting it as a student asset. If we want to kind of if we considered those to be student assets, they would be hit much more harshly in the financial aid formula. Kids' assets have a much higher assessment rate than the parents' assets do. The theory being, parents have other financial responsibilities. We can't expect them to contribute everything they have to college. Kids, don't tend to really have much in terms of financial responsibilities. Everything they've got in the bank could be going to college. So it's actually better that they're looked at as parent assets, but that also means you have to report all of them, because they know the fact is with the 529, though you have to list one child as a beneficiary, you can change the beneficiary within the family. So if you only had to report for that child, you could just move everything into the youngest child's name and not have to report it for the older child. They've gotten wise to that you can actually use the money for anyone in the family, so you have to report them all as your asset. Yes. Yes, child support, it gets reported as part of the custodial parent's income. They ask about your adjusted gross income, your income off your tax return, and then a few forms of untaxed income that you might have had, including child support payments. So yeah, that does get counted as part of your income if you're receiving the child support. Again, if that child support is going away in future years, that is something like a special circumstance to alert the financial aid office about. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
So when you decide that you want to go somewhere, you apply, you go back and log in, and then say, okay, now send it there.
Yeah, so if you know kind of up front the list of 10 schools you're applying to, when you first log into the FAFSA, you can list all 10 schools, have it sent to them right away. If you don't know all of them, like I said, if you maybe 3 schools you're going to apply to right now, or on October 1st, maybe when the FAFSA becomes available, you want to kind of get the FAFSA over with, you send it to those 3 schools, make sure those schools have it nice and early, but then over the next couple months you decide on a few more schools that you're going to apply to. Yeah, you just log back into the FAFSA, add those schools, click submit again, and it gets sent to the new schools. No, with all the information saved, you just add the schools. Yeah.
So the student loan gets deferred as far as the payments go, not the
So the question was, so the student loan payments are deferred while the student is in school, and that is correct. You don't have to make any payments while the student is enrolled in school. Depending, it makes things a little bit confusing. The Stafford loan that I mentioned, that's the, the 27,000 total over the 4 years. There's two versions of the Stafford loan, subsidized or unsubsidized, depending on your need. If you have need, you get awarded a subsidized loan. If you don't have need, according to the calculations, you get unsubsidized. Subsidized does not accrue interest during that whole deferment period. So the subsidized loan is the best one. You don't have to make payments, and it's not accruing interest. It doesn't cost you anything until after the student graduates. The unsubsidized loan, while you don't have to make payments while the student is in school, and I'm sorry I've had my back to you like the whole time, the unsubsidized loan will be accruing interest that whole time, just so you know. Again, you're not required to make payments. You can make payments at any time, so if you wanted to kind of keep up with interest payments while the student is in school, you could do that with the unsubsidized loan. But then the question was, well, what about parent loans? Those aren't deferred, are they? And so if it's the Parent Plus loan, you're talking about the government parent loan option. You actually have the option. The default option is that you do start making payments right away while the student is enrolled in school. But you do have the option if you want to, and it's basically like checking a box on the application, or if you don't decide till later, you just call your loan servicer and say, I want to defer payments while my child is in school. They actually do allow you to do that with the Plus loan. You can defer payments if you want to. Again, just a matter of contacting the loan servicer, and they'll put it into a deferment for you. It also will accrue interest that whole time. So, it's in your best interest if you can afford to make payments while the student's in school. It's in your best financial interest to do that, but you're not required to with the Plus loan. They do allow you to defer. Now, if instead of the Plus loan, you chose to do like a private bank loan, or even the MHFA loan, with many private loans, including the MHFA loan, they may give you some options where they might like give you the lowest interest rate if you agree to make payments while the student is in school and start paying it back right away. They might allow you to defer payments, but they're going to charge you a higher interest rate for the privilege of doing so. So with the private loan, it depends on the bank that's lending it, what their policies are, but they often have kind of a few different loan options to defer payments totally, to maybe just make interest-only payments while the student is in school, or to pay fully, work on principal and interest while the student is in school. With a private loan, you might have options like that. Other questions?
Still a loan servicer, because I've used them in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question was, does MHFA still offer their own loans? And yeah, we do. So yeah, when it comes down to it, and I think we'll talk about them a little bit in that after the acceptance webinar, but yeah, when it comes down to it, if you're finding yourself short and you do need to borrow a loan, I'd go to our website and look at our loan product, because we do try to kind of stay competitive, try and be kind of lower than the Plus loan. So yeah, and I don't know yet what our rates will be for next year. We generally set those, kind of in the, I guess, like late winter when people are making decisions, but definitely check out our website, because we do have some loan products and that we tend to try and keep the interest rates pretty low. Yes?
Back to the loans a little bit. If you've taken out that subsidized student loan and while it's deferred, you start to pay it back, does that lower the monthly expense, or does it simply come off the principal? You've taken out a full
Yeah.
$2,700, but before, while it's still deferred, you start to pay off $7,000, so it's only $20,000.
Yeah.
Does that come off principal, or does it lower the 10-year monthly payment?
It would come off you would have lower monthly payments. It depends on, I guess, how much you've borrowed, if you're still paying back. As long as you have less to pay back overall, so you will have a lower monthly payment unless you borrowed so little that there's like a $50 minimum monthly payment. And if you borrowed enough, or you're at least paying a $50 minimum, then it would just shorten the time period. But you would have a 10-year repayment time on the Stafford loans, regardless of how much you've borrowed. Again, barring that, unless you borrowed a very low amount where the minimum's not even going to take you 10 years. But barring that, you have a 10-year repayment time on the Stafford loan. So you're either paying $27,000 off over 10 years, or you're paying $20,000 off, or you're paying $10,000, however much you've decided to borrow. You have 10 years to pay that back. So if you borrow less or you pay some of it off in advance, your monthly payments are going to be lower. Oh, yeah, you snuck it in under the wire, yes.
With, like, in-state schools, is it a safe assumption that there's less merit and grant money for Massachusetts students as you apply to UMass, just assume that they're not going to get it?
No, so the question was, can you assume at like an in-state public school, they're gonna have less money available, like scholarship money? I guess the assumption being like, you're already getting a discount. As an in-state student, they don't have to offer you more of a discount. I would say that's not necessarily a proper assumption. Schools definitely do have scholarships for in-state residents. In fact, I'll just say for myself, I went to UMass Amherst on a full scholarship. And that was because I did very, very well in high school, and UMass was kind of like a safety school for me. And so they wanted to recruit me, so they offered me a nice, generous scholarship. So again, that same kind of scholarship theory applies. So they definitely, the state schools do have scholarships for in-state students. I will say, kind of looking kind of more globally, there has been kind of a growing trend, and people have been quite critical of colleges, public colleges offering more of their money to out-of-state students as a means of attracting them, to get them to pay the rest of the big out-of-state tuition. You know, if you give a Massachusetts state resident a $10,000 scholarship, if UMass or Framingham State or whatever gives a Massachusetts state resident $10,000 scholarship, that student ends up paying not much of anything. Whereas if you give the same $10,000 scholarship to an out-of-state student, you kind of lure them in with that nice scholarship money and get them to pay the rest of the big, $30,000 out-of-state tuition. That's kind of the theory, and there has been a growing trend of states doing more and more of that. And lots of people have jumped on that and being very critical of that, because it's like, that's taxpayer money and you're throwing it out to state students, whereas that should be going to support our own in-state students. I will say for most state schools, they have some money of each. UMass is going to give some scholarship money to out-of-state students to try and pull them in, but they also have some money for their own in-state students too, to support students in state. So in most state schools, it's going to be sort of a combo. I will say that the state schools in general have less money to give than the private schools do, because the private schools cost so much, they got kind of money to play with. And kind of as a general rule, you'd expect higher scholarship from a private school, but is it enough to bring the cost of that private school down to the cost of an in-state public school? Sometimes, yes, it can happen. More often than not, no. More often than not, your in-state public is still going to be your least expensive. But again, I think it's always, or not always, I guess, but it tends to be a good idea to apply to kind of a good range of schools in terms of price and in terms of selectivity. That way, your bases are covered, and you should end up with some good options to choose from in the end. Yes. Mm-hmm. So I would check with the individual school on that. The question was if you can apply to a combined program where they're often like a 5-year program where you get your bachelor's and master's within 5 years. Does that affect like the undergraduate aid? Check with the school, like once you get your offer of, okay, this grant money, am I getting that for all 5 years, or is it only for the undergrad years? And what are you considering the undergrad years? Is it 4 years or is it only 3 years? Sometimes they do it like the first 3 years are really undergrad. You get your undergrad requirements done, and then the last 2 years are considered grad. So that really depends on the school. You'd want to ask the individual school. Like the loan limit stuff, Once the school considers you a graduate student, those loan limits actually go up, like that $5,000 to $7,000. As a grad student, you can borrow like $20,000 in the Stafford loans. Though no subsidized, they're all unsubsidized as a graduate student. So whenever the school officially moves you to graduate student status, you can borrow more. But in terms of any grant or scholarship money they give you, that's something you'd want to verify. Do I get this for all 5 years, or does this end at some point? You would want to check with the financial aid office directly. Okay. Any other? Yeah.
What about a commuter student? If they're calculating based off of tuition, housing, how do you
Yeah.
provide to the community?
Yeah, so the question was, what about commuter students? I showed, I don't know if I can flip way back to that, this cost of attendance budget that the schools start with. All right, decided not to work anymore. But I talked about the cost of attendance budget that the school starts with, and that's what they subtract your EFC from to get at your need level. I oversimplified it a bit, saying the school starts with a cost of attendance budget. Each school actually has 3 cost of attendance budgets that they use, one for students living on campus, one for students living in an off-campus apartment, and one for students commuting from home. And so that starting number is going to be different depending on what housing option you've indicated, and you do indicate that when you fill out the FAFSA. One of the questions is, are you planning on living on campus, off campus, or at home with your parents? And so that if you're planning on commuting, that your budget, that cost of attendance budget, is going to be lower because they'll be assuming less, that you have less living expenses. So then the financial aid will kind of be lower in accordance with that. And sometimes folks don't know, like you think maybe you put down on the FAFSA you're going to live on campus, but then you realize maybe I can't afford to live on campus, maybe I'm going to commute if it's a school close to home. If you make a decision like that, or you're considering a decision like that, I would talk to the financial aid office, because that financial aid might change. If they've awarded you based on an on-campus budget and then you decide to commute, you can't necessarily keep all that on-campus aid. They might have to adjust your financial aid. So if you're considering kind of changing whatever you indicated on the FAFSA, talk to the financial aid office before you make that decision and find out how the aid might change. All righty, well, thanks everybody. And if more questions pop up, again, just call us, email us, you've got all our info. And please drop the evaluations on the table in the back. And thank you all for coming.